Good to see everybody tonight on this cold Wednesday night, and hope our discussion as we continue in James chapter 4 will be beneficial to each one. And y'all, as always, feel free to jump in and participate as you will. We're in the section verses 13 to 17 in James chapter 4 about the confidence that one would have in deciding that he's going to do something or making his plans for the future without involving God. Now, prior to that, he was been talking about humility there in verse 10, and he was talking about not speaking evil of a brother, making sure we treat each other right, and that sort of thing. Those were the two main things prior to that. And then he kind of changed gears a little bit, switched gears there in verse 13 when he was talking about the plans that we make without involving God in our decisions. That we say that we're going to go into the city, we're going to do this, that, or the other. He's given an example of this man who says we're going to go into the city and we're going to buy and sell and get gain. We're going to stay for a year. And he says you don't have any idea whether you're going to stay for a year or not, or whether you're even going into that city. So basically says that we need to couch all of that in terms of if God will, we'll do this, that, or the other. And that's the point that he's making there in verses 13 to 17. We need to realize our total dependence on God, need to rely on him, we need to pray to him. It doesn't mean that we don't make plans for the future. Not saying you don't make any plans or any thoughts about the future. That's not what he's saying at all. And we certainly need to do that. But by the same token, what he's saying is we don't need to leave God out of the plans, and that was what he was condemned for. He wasn't condemned for making plans. He was condemned because he didn't put God in his plans, and that's a very important thing. So then when we get to verse 15, he says, instead of saying we're going to do this, that, or other, he says, here's what you ought to say. You ought to say, if the Lord will, we'll do this, that, or the other. So instead of what you do say, that we're going to go into the city, you ought rather to say and recognize your absolute dependence on God and feel that life and success both are subject to his will. We have no promise of tomorrow. We mentioned that in reference to Proverbs 27:1. We have no promise. We have hope of tomorrow, but we don't have a promise that that's going to take place. So we need to recognize our dependence on him and to form all of our plans with reference to his will. And that's the point that he's making there. So then that little clause, if the Lord will, we mentioned that. I think Scott made a point last week, and we mentioned that in connection with 1 Corinthians 4:19, where Paul told them, if the Lord will, he's going to see them. He's going to do this, that, and the other. And that's what we need to be about in making our plans for the future. So he alone is the one that can keep us. He alone, talking about God, is the one that can make our plans prosperous. In many different ways, he can thwart our plans, but he can help us in our plans, and he can frustrate us if he pleases. But we need to realize that we need to base everything on God's will and God's plans for our future, and not rely just on ourselves, because sometimes we pray this way: without him we would be nothing, and without him we would not have anything. Everything that we have or hope to have comes from him. Everything that we are or hope to be is because of him. So we need to realize that. And then in verse 16, but now you rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. Probably what he's talking about here, according to Albert Barnes, it probably has to do with what he had just talked about, even though there is a general principle that he's going to talk about here in just a minute. But when you just rely on your own skill and your own talents, your own plans for the future, your own wisdom about all of this without involving him, and you're so confident of success, you're so confident that everything is going to work out. You don't anticipate the failure that might happen. You don't anticipate the brevity of life. You don't see how any of the things that you plan can possibly go wrong. So what he's saying is that you're rejoicing in that. In other words, you just kind of take it upon yourself to believe that all these things are going to work out. You form your thoughts as if everything's going to be perfect. God is not involved in any of that. And so he's saying that you rejoice in your boasting about that, and he says you shouldn't do that. All such rejoicing is evil. He said it's founded, Barnes mentions this, it's founded on a wrong view of yourselves of what may occur. It shows a spirit forgetful of our dependence on God, forgetful of the uncertainty of life, forgetful of the many ways by which the best laid plans may be defeated. And he said this, and it's so true, a day, an hour may defeat our best plans and show us that we have not the slightest power to control coming events. They're so true. I was going to mention, and Lloyd knows who I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to mention it just for a second as an example. One of my best friends growing up was Doodlebug, and I know Lloyd knows him. He lived over there for a while, pretty close to where Lloyd grew up. And Doodlebug and I and Lloyd were about the same age. He was 13 and I was 13, and Doodlebug and I were playing on, his name's Walter Darty is his name, but everybody called him Doodlebug. So he was a really good friend, and so early in the summer, we were playing baseball on Coach Jones' Pony League baseball team. And just to show you how your life can change in a split second, that morning, he and I picked up potatoes all morning across the road from where we live, the Cleverness Farm there, right there at the corner, right where our house was at that time. We picked up potatoes, but we had baseball practice at 3 o'clock that afternoon. So we got through picking up potatoes about 12 or 12:30, and so we came in, and so Mom and I took Doodlebug home, and we lived about a mile and a half apart. And so he said, I'll just meet y'all back at your house about 2:30 or thereabouts. We'll go to baseball practice that afternoon at 3 o'clock. Well, he didn't come, but Mom said, well, so why don't we just go over there and pick him up? So I said, yeah, let's do that. So we got down to the creek, got down to the corner there, County Road 28, turned left, saw all these cars down there, about 200 yards down the road. And Mom said, that's Doodlebug. I said, no, that's not Doodlebug. He said, yeah, that's Doodlebug. I know that's Doodlebug. I said, no, it's not Doodlebug. So we drive down there and pull over on the right side, and there's somebody stretched out on the road there. And Jenny Ard comes over, and she's crying, and she says, that's Doodlebug. He's dead. Just like that, a 16-year-old boy driving really, really fast, according to the reports, hit him on the side of the road, knocked him about 90 feet, and killed him instantly. So the point in all of that is, when Albert Barnes says just an hour can change things, or an hour or a day or whatever can change so much about your life, it is certainly true. So it's kind of like, I was thinking about that, about those people in Israel on October the 7th, where they were out there having a good time, everything was going great for them, and all of a sudden you have all these barbarians coming in there and killing 12 or 1,400 of them just like that. And so you can see just how quickly things can change. Life is very fragile. The plane crashes and the wrecks and the accidents, the various things that occur in life make us realize our dependence on God. And what he's saying here, you don't need to rejoice about all these things that you're planning to do without involving God in your plans. And that's the point that he's trying to make here. Matter of fact, David, you remember on one occasion told, when he was still running from Saul, told Jonathan there in 1 Samuel 20, verse 3, there's just a step between me and death. And that principle can be applied in so many ways. It's just, we're talking about Randy a while ago, you just a heartbeat away from going into eternity. I mean, it can just happen so quickly. And I think that's the point that he's trying to make here. in verses 15 and 16. You ought to say, if the Lord will, we're going to do such and such, and not make our plans. And sometimes without involving God, sometimes we do that, not intentionally necessarily, but what he's saying is, you don't have any promise. You don't have any promise of tomorrow, that it can change so quickly. Your life can change so quickly. And we've all seen that in our lives, and various family members and others that you and I have dealt with from time to time, that the plans we thought they were going to live this, that, and the other, going to do good, wound up not being that way. Scott, you had a thought?
Two things. I think it's somewhat implied, at least to most Christians, to realize that you should pray on things, and that maybe in this situation, if he had prayed ahead of time and kind of wait through his answer to see what he should do,
Mm-hmm.
maybe just like with the rich man who tore down his barns and were building others, then maybe God would have directed him away from that and not put him in the position that he ended up in.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Again, if he would have prayed to God, maybe he would have been a little bit wiser.
Absolutely.
Before he made his
Absolutely.
his move.
Absolutely. Well, even the Lord in the Garden of Gethsemane prayed, if the Lord will, if God wills. When you praying that prayer 3 different times, and of course we know what God's plan was from eternity, but it was not his will that he skipped the death that he had to undergo. All right, any other thoughts, anybody, before we get into the last verse there, in verse 17?
You talk about not knowing when your time is coming. I was watching a documentary last night on World War II, and the Marines were landing on the island of Hilleley, I believe that's what it's called. But anyway, they got to the shore, and something happened. The guy operating the boat couldn't get the ramp to come down there. All hollering, put the ramp down, put the ramp down. And about that time, a mortar landed right in front of the boat and blew up. If the ramp had gone down when he first stopped, it killed everybody in there.
Yeah.
So, but they made it, they all made it off the boat.
Yeah.
But you never know, there's things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And all of us,
Absolutely.
We left almost a split second earlier or a split
Yeah.
second later.
That's right. That's right. Change in a heartbeat. Did you know that Charlie Bird was on that island, Peleliu? Yeah.
No, I didn't. I knew it was Okinawa.
Yeah.
I was on Okinawa. We talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember something.
They invited Charlie back for some kind of celebration.
Is that right?
He had doctored several Japanese civilians.
Yeah.
He was a medic.
Yeah. I never heard him talk about that, but somebody said that he was one of the flamethrowers of trying to get him out of the caves and all.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's what I was told now. I don't know.
He told me he was a medic, so you don't do most of it.
Yeah.
He may have done
not
both. Could have
been.
been both.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got the VHS tape on that, Charlie gave me, because they had him in the news over there, interviewed him, they showed quite a bit of it. Pretty interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's
Have some tough fighting there.
a terrible fight there.
Oh, yeah.
It's all caves.
Trying to get him out of those caves and everything. Yeah.
Had to burn them out. They wouldn't come out.
Yeah, it wouldn't come out. All right, so then he sums it all up there in verse 17. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Now, that's a general principle that can be applied in a lot of different ways. Now, what he's probably talking about here, the main thing that he's talking about here is that the proposition here is referring to the point he had just made, that you're making your plans and your thoughts without involving God. In other words, the good thing to do would be to involve God in your plans. If the Lord will, we're going to do this, that, and the other. So that's probably what he's talking about in the strictest sense of this particular verse. In other words, he's forming his plans boastingly and confident of success and so forth. And what he's saying is, that when you do that, you are guilty of sin against God if you're not involving God in your plans. But in a broader sense, Barnes and others say that this would be like we would call it the sin of omission. To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. In other words, we're omitting something that we ought to do that we don't do. In other words, we come up short. We don't go beyond. We're not transgressing, but we do come up short, and that too is sin. That's what he's saying here. Him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin. So if we look at it that way in a broadest sense, you can apply it in a lot of different ways. So what he's saying here seems to be that if you understand what your duty is, if you have the means of doing good, if you have the wealth to do it, or the influence to do it, or an opportunity to do it, as we have opportunity, let's do good to all men, them of the household of faith and so forth. Whatever it might be, if you can help someone who's mourning, having a difficult time, if you can relieve the oppressed and the distressed and do the things that God wants us to do, what he's saying is, if you have the means to do that, you have an obligation to do that, is basically what he's saying. Him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So the obligation there is that we need to do it if we're capable of doing it, if we can do it, that we're not released from that obligation to do it, basically is what he's saying here. So I looked at a couple of passages in that connection, and we won't go back and read all of it, but in Matthew 25, 31 through 46, what did he say? You got the sick to take care of, and the hungry, and the thirsty, and those in prison, and somebody that needs your help, that's naked or stranger or whatever it might be. And there were two classes of people. One did what they should do for those people, one did not. So what he's saying here is, him that knoweth to do good, in other words, you have the opportunity and the means to do something to help someone, that you have the energy to do it, you have the money to do it, and so forth. He's just simply saying we should do it. And I think the second example to me would be the 5 talent, 2 talent, 1 talent man that he mentions in Matthew 25. Both of those are in Matthew 25. But the 5, 2, and 1 talent men that he talks about there in Matthew 25, the 5 talent man used his, and the 2 talent man used his, and 1 talent man did not. Even though I'm sure that he had the opportunity to do it, he certainly had the ability to do it. God gave him that 1 talent, and he didn't do anything with it. And so what he's saying is, he was condemned, but not because he had 1 talent. He was condemned because he didn't use what God told him to do. And I think this is what he's saying here in the broadest sense, this particular verse, that we have the opportunity, we have the privilege of helping somebody or doing good for somebody, or a particular event, to comfort those who need comforting and to help those who need help in various ways. And to the degree that we can help, what he's saying is that we should do that. And if you don't, he's simply saying that is a sin. Any thoughts about that, anybody? All right.
Lester, I do. There is, of course, when we're studying the Bible, that there is a difference between interpretation and an application. And not disagreeing with anything you've said, of course, but just as far as clarifying, the text here is referring, like you said, the interpretation. There's only one interpretation of the Bible, God's interpretation.
Right.
But we can make many applications of a text.
Right.
You can also be extreme on this, where people believe the sin omission to the point where they beat themselves up.
Oh yeah.
Over
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it becomes a defeatist attitude, so they have to be careful.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Not to take it too far, because we can always. Why didn't you go have 10 Bible studies?
That's right.
Why didn't you do this, that, or any other?
Why didn't you go out and visit somebody today, or why didn't I do this, that, and other today? Absolutely. You're exactly right about that.
Yes, sir. So that's an application, though, of this, because like you said, it's in a broader sense. but the interpretation, there's only one, and it
Yeah.
applies to
What he just said.
what
Yeah.
he just said.
Yep.
They did not include the Lord, and him knows to do better than that.
Yeah.
Do it or not, he sinned.
That's right. That's exactly. That's a good point. That's the reason I mentioned that the strictest part of it is,
Right.
if you look at it strictly, he's talking about what he had just talked about there.
Right.
But Barnes mentions that there's a broader context, and I think that, like you said, you can apply it in a lot of different ways, a lot of different verses. We can take like that and kind of spread it out and apply it in a lot of different ways. But like you said, you do have to be very careful about that, because it can be very discouraging if you say, well, I mean, you can find something all day. Instead of me, washing my car tomorrow, I need to be out doing something else, kind of thing. And I understand what you're saying there. You can take it to the nth degree, because you can always, the Bible says that Jesus went about doing good. Well, we have 24 hours a day, but we don't go about doing good all the time. We know to do it, but we don't go about doing good all the time. It's not that we try to do something bad, but it'd be pretty impossible to do that 24 hours a day, kind of thing.
Well, it had to do with the idea of what they call gradual sanctification, and the idea that a person didn't really know that if they were saved or not, but rather that they were getting closer to God, getting closer.
Yeah.
This gradual sanctification is, something I struggled with, and it's the idea of, well, I'm eventually going to be in a good place and in a good relationship with God, and I'm not sure, and what it is, it's a defeatist attitude.
Yeah.
And people, unfortunately, mistake the idea of the sin of omission along those same lines.
Yeah.
That's contrary to 1 John 3:19 and following. Even though our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart.
Yeah.
And but I'm just additional comment, nothing against what you had
Yeah.
said, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because you can beat yourself up over things that you don't do, and you say, well, it's kind of like my mom's always saying. That's a good point, because it brings up a thought that my mom was saying a while back. She said it to me several times. Said, I hope I've done enough. I just hope I've done enough. I said, Mom, there's no way, with all due respect, there's no way you'll ever do enough. There's no way that any of us will ever do enough. We don't merit salvation. It's impossible for us to do enough for God to say, you deserve it. Right. That's why he says that by grace are you saved through faith. And so anyway, I think somebody brought up the verse a while back, 1 John 5:13, that you can know your condition. But I understand exactly what Israel is saying, because in the strictest sense of the word, none of us do enough. None of us will ever earn it. None of us will ever merit salvation. But if we continue to walk in the light as He is in the light, His blood continues to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And but we have the right idea, and we have our thinking is right about that, and what Israel said in 1 John 3:19 and following is exactly right. And I think that's part of what he said in 1 John 1 verse 7, that we continue to walk in the light. We're doing everything that we can. Yes, we sin. We have evil thoughts. We do some things that we shouldn't. Think about things we shouldn't think about. Maybe do something we shouldn't do. Maybe we don't do something we should do. All these things. But His blood, the Bible says, continues to cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and I certainly believe that. Absolutely. Good point. Good point.
One more thing, Coach. You also are familiar with 1 Peter 4:17, for if the righteous are scarcely saved.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with just barely going
Barely
in.
making it, right.
Because that contrary to 2 Peter 1:11, that
Yeah.
abundant entrance in that kingdom, that just has to do with persecution. But when I first became affiliated with Churches of Christ, I heard 1 Peter 4:17, if the righteous are scarcely saved,
Yeah.
just barely.
Yeah.
If they're just barely saved, and what it is, after a while, a person can believe this and throw in the towel and say, what's the point?
Yeah.
I just, if I can't have assurance, and so that's just kind of a sensitive topic
Oh, yeah.
with me, and also, you know, helping young converts, or which
Oh,
have
yeah.
to be assured and strengthened.
Yeah.
So,
Well, just like what's said about keep the whole law and yet offended one point, he was guilty of all. So you can take that and misapply it, and you'd be miserable by that. Well, what did I do today that offended God to the point that, you know, if I die today, He's going to send me to eternal punishment, you know, kind of
Right.
thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got to be very careful about that. You made some good points, Israel. Appreciate that.
I guess you could almost think about on your way to church, you see somebody that's in a car turned upside down in a ditch, and you can ask yourself, should I stop and help him, or should I go to church?
Yeah.
Well, that kind of brings up all kinds of problems
Yeah.
there if you're beating yourself up over something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
still, you know, we should always reach out to help those.
Yeah, there are just so many, like Israel said, so many applications on things like that.
Exactly.
It's just like you're driving down the road and I'm by myself and see this guy hitchhiking that I used to do all the time. I said, well, I know it'd be good to pick him up, but
Yep.
maybe I better not pick him up, you know, kind of thing.
Yep.
So-
Scott was talking about Mac Deaver. I think I've told this story before, but he said one time, what would you do if you're on the way to church and somebody who had a flat tire, a lady or something, she said, I hope somebody not as religious as me comes along. Helps you.
That's it. There you go.
I gotta get to church.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we got to be careful how we use that. Like Israel said, it can be very discouraging if you think of it in terms of every single thing that you need to do and then you don't do it, then and apply it that way. It's a pretty tough deal to live with it that way.
I always think about that verse that talks about entertaining angels unaware. You
Yeah.
know, you do good for someone or help someone out.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever actually helped an angel, but I try to help people.
yeah, absolutely.
You never can
But
do
you
that.
don't know.
No. Go ahead.
Blessed assurance.
But some of the people I helped, I know weren't angels.
I think the greatest, in this course, you know, qualifying the term, it's in my opinion, example of the grace of God being applied is John 15:1-3. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. But every branch in me that beareth fruit, he purchaseth it, that it may bring forth
More fruit. Yep.
Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. The idea that you're a branch, you need purging. God helps with that. He
Yep.
works with you. That's the grace of God right there.
Yep.
You're going to have imperfections in your life. You're going to have room for growth. And that purging is God's grace working with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we may bring forth more fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, that's a good point. In 1 John 1, you know, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. If we say have no sin, we make him a liar, because we do. You know, we do sin, absolutely. But his grace, his blood continues to cleanse us and makes us better all the time as we pray to him, as we study his word, as we try to apply it to the best of our ability. Absolutely. Good point. All right, in chapter 5, in verse 1, let's read the first 2 or 3. Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You've heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You've lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You've nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. So let's stop there and look at that. He's trying to get their attention again. He's used that same expression that he used earlier, go to now. meaning pay attention, listen to what I'm fixing to tell you. And when he talks about the rich here, the rich weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you, he's not condemning all the rich, but he's condemning those that he just talked about the rich. That you've gone in the city, you're going to buy and sell, you're going to get gain, you're going to do all these other things. But we know that not all rich people are bad folks. They're not all rich people are going to lose their soul. We know what Jesus said about how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven and all of that, certainly so. But he's talking about those rich that are unjust, or those that are oppressive, those that don't live right and do right. The fact that you're merely rich, and that's always a subjective kind of thing too. You and I, by the world standards, are rich, so we could be in that category if you want to look at it, apply it worldwide. But what he's talking about here is seemingly the manner in which you get your wealth and what you do with it when you have it. And I think that's the point that he's trying to make here, that the way that it would be used, the way that it's acquired. And so he says, if you don't acquire it in the right sort of way, or maybe implied or inferred in that, or you don't use it in the right sort of way, he says, weep and howl for those miseries that are come upon you. So this is a very intense kind of thing that he's saying, that you're going to have a lot of lamentations, you're going to have a lot of issues to deal with if you don't handle that in the right sort of way. When he's talking about these miseries, Barnes talks about that there's some that thought that maybe he was talking about the punishment of the Jews for some of the zealots in the early part of the century, and so first century and so forth, that was taking their property or taking their possessions and so forth and so on. He said, but it's more natural to suppose that the apostle means to say that such men as here refers to, that he's referring to, expose themselves to the wrath of God, and that they had reason to feel the wrath of God because of the way that they were handling the riches that they had. So that's kind of a lesson to us, kind of piggybacking what Israel was saying a while ago. We can do a lot of good. We can do a lot of good with the money, or we can do bad with the money. But the same kind of thing could be applied that we were talking about a while ago about, you know that you ought to do something, you know that you ought to do your money, but you can't beat yourself up over it, like Israel was talking about a while ago about, well, I should have done this instead of buying this Coke. You know, I should have sent my money to these people that are, you know, the Wounded Warriors Project or something. I should have done that rather than, buying a steak with it or whatever, you know, kind of thing. I could have done without the steak. You know, I should have sent that $19 to the Wounded Warriors Project or to St. Jude or something, you know. So we have to be very careful about how we use that. But in the main, he says that when you withhold what you need to give, and the same thing could be applied, I guess, to our giving as well. You know, could you give a little bit more, or could you give $5 more a week or whatever? You know, perhaps so. But he says what happens is these people are hoarding up so much that over a period of time, he says in verse 2, your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten. So the things that they could have used for the benefit of others, he says, are they're accumulating so much more than they need themselves. Paul talked about distributing to the necessity of saints in Romans 12, verse 13, and there are other situations that could be applied that way as well. So what we need to do, we need to be using it in the right sort of way. And I think that's the point that he's trying to make here. So a lot of people in the Bible that were described as wealthy, the rich, and I mean, you can look at Solomon, you can look at Abraham, you can look at Job, you can look at a lot of others that were rich. They weren't condemned for their riches, at least I don't read it that way. But and for you and me, we might not be rich by Bill Gates standards or by, Zuckerberg standards or, that sort of a guy. But by other standards, we may be. So it's kind of a subjective thing. But the Bible talks about those that would desire to be rich have pierced themselves through. You don't have to even be rich, but they have pierced themselves through with many sorrows and so forth. Go ahead.
Just for along with what you're saying too, that also 1 Timothy 6:17 charged them that are rich in this world,
Yep.
that they be not
Not high-minded.
high-minded. Verse 18, that they be willing to communicate, ready to distribute. So, like you said, it's not sinful having means and wealth. These people in James 5 here are the stingy.
Yep.
I've seen this. I'm sure you have many times. I've seen people that for whom I work and know. You would think that they were as poor as Job's turkey.
Yeah.
But whenever they can't let it go, they can't let it go. But they'll have multi millions, and they'll be from oil money, Coca-Cola, or whatever. And it's amazing that they don't even use it themselves.
Yeah. That's what he's talking about here, is hoarding it, laying it up, and then it's going to rust and
That's why I say
Wear out.
rust, because it's not being used.
Not being used.
It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
right
good point.
And also, I'll sometimes preach about some congregations, unfortunately, is it's like when the Lord returns, they're gonna write him a check
Yeah.
for all that they've got in the bank. And I'm not knocking stewardship or accountability or anything like that, but just the idea of being benevolent. I have, when I preached in Arkansas, congregations be out there in, say, Egypt, Arkansas, or something like that, in the middle of nowhere. There'd be 50 people there that would attend. They'd have a $200 that they would give for the contribution, but several farmers had died, and they'd have a couple $100,000 in the bank, and never being used.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Exactly.
those kind of things. I think God frowns upon.
Absolutely. And I think that's what he's talking about here, isn't it? I mean, that's the point that he's making. He says, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them and so forth. You've heaped up treasure for the last days and so forth. So what he's saying is you haven't used it. You haven't used what God has given you to use. And that's the point I think that he's trying to make here. As the Lord said, everything is, you've hoarded it up to the point that it's corrupted or it's rotten. The clothes that you have so many clothes there that, you could distribute, you could help somebody else that may be in need. You have something there that you hadn't worn in 40 years or whatever. You just hoard it up is basically what he's saying. Barnes makes a good point about when he's talking about your clothes are moth-eaten. He says that the fashions back in that day in the East, and even to some degree today, that their fashions don't change, so they just hoard up. They just hoard up what they've got over and over and over, and just lay it up. And then after a while, after 20 or 30 or 40, 50 years or whatever, it's moth-eaten and so forth and so on. Like Israel's talking about, where it could be doing some good. Somebody could be using that. Somebody could be getting some good out of it. And as a result, he said these miseries are going to come upon you because of that. Israel made a good point a while ago. These are the same people that he's talking about that were stingy and just hoarding it to the point that that God condemns. God condemns that type of
It may not be
attitude.
in this lifetime that it comes upon them. but
That's right.
eventually.
It will. It's going to be
We've seen
eventually.
rich people who look like they were very happy.
Going to reap what you sow eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate your thoughts.